Hi guys, welcome back to Giant Talk, the world's first OKR podcast in partnership with Coan, the dedicated OKR platform. Today I'm joined by Lawrence from Team TBG, and we're going to be talking in another edition of our Toolbox first series all about Spotlight and Floodlight. So Lawrence, I know everyone probably knows who you are, especially if podcast listeners have been listening to the podcast for a while, but can you give us a brief intro for new people, please?
Sure, yeah, thanks Jenny. Hey everybody, great to be back on the podcast. As Jenny said, most of you who have listened to the later series probably know my voice as I hosted series 2, 3 and 4, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, probably about 45 episodes or something where you can hear my dulcet tones on the podcast. But outside of that, I'm head of OKR projects for There Be Giants. So I lead on all of our OKR implementations basically with our clients on a day-to-day basis.
Perfect, thank you. So let's dive in on the subject. So I mentioned it's about Spotlight versus Floodlight. So what does that actually mean?
Yeah, okay. So people are probably looking at this episode title thinking, what the hell are they talking about? Basically, Spotlight versus Floodlight is just an analogy that we really like to use to talk about how OKRs are best used, in that they should be used to focus on the strategic priorities for the business at any one time.
Okay.
So we use them like a spotlight. We use them to focus in on those priorities. What we don't use them like is a floodlight, i.e. we're not lighting up the whole stage. We're picking out specific areas of the stage that we want people to focus their attention on. And we want to drive everybody's attention to those spotlights, to those areas of focus. Hence the analogy.
Perfect, thanks. So I suppose something you mentioned there about kind of spotlighting in and giving those areas of focus. And is trying to focus on too many things a common problem you've seen a lot with businesses?
Yeah, with businesses of all shapes and sizes, it's not just a startup problem. Startups do often fall into this trap because there's a lot that they have to get done all the time. But we've seen it of companies of, 1,000 people plus as well, big, long established organizations that just try and drive focus onto absolutely everything and try and make everything a priority all the time. And it's a bit of a cliche, but it's true that if everything is a priority, then nothing is a priority. We have so many clients that when they come to us say, one of the biggest problems that we have in our organization is that we start lots of projects and hardly any of them ever get finished. And what does get finished, we never measure the impact of. So we never know actually if it was successful or not, or whether it was a worthwhile project. We just throw 1,000 things at the wall and hope that some of them stick. And I think that's a lot of techniques that a lot of businesses use, to be honest. So they really do need to start spotlighting what they're focusing on.
Yeah, I suppose, like you say, spreading people too thinly as well, because there's so many priorities. So we mentioned a couple of problems there, but I suppose what problems can this cause deeper down in the organisation?
There's twofold, I suppose. Nobody actually knows what they should be working on to have the highest impact. How they can deliver greater success for their team, for themselves, and for the organization. That's the first major problem. The second major problem is that nobody actually understands how the day-to-day business they're working on contributes to the overall goals of the business. So there's no sense of purpose in the employees. They come in, they do their 9-to-5 job, and they go home again with absolutely no understanding whatsoever of what the strategic priorities of the business are, and therefore how what they do on a day-to-day basis contributes to that, which is going to lower employee engagement straight away.
Yeah, and I think something that a lot more people are looking for in a role now is kind of worth behind that role, and what is that purpose and what are they working towards. So if like you say, if they're kind of just dropping into a 9-to-5 and there's none of that going on, there's, like you say, very going to quickly drop out and maybe look for something else where they do get that.
Yeah, absolutely. All research is showing us that at the moment. That a sense of purpose in their role is pretty much the highest contributor to employee engagement. And employee engagement is the highest contributor to attracting and retaining top talent. And what company doesn't want top talent, I suppose?
Exactly.
So it's really important. We think we're talking about just the strategical implementation here, but actually we're talking about something that could lead to employee churn, employee turnover, client turnover, all those sorts of things, if it's done poorly.
Yeah, like you say, it affects pretty much absolutely everything. So in terms of kind of Floodlight, what's clear indicators are there that somebody is potentially applying it rather than a spotlight to their OKRs, just for our listeners to kind of, I suppose, things that might trigger in their mind so they know what they're applying?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because OKRs aren't a magic fix to this problem. They're only a fix to this problem if they're used properly, if they're used in this spotlight technique. And what we've seen people do, and there's a client that comes to mind that I worked with at the beginning of last year, in fact, maybe even the year before now, scarily, that had an incredible amount of data. I've never seen so many KPIs in all my life. And they basically started with that list of however many 100 KPIs and tried to put them all into OKRs.
Wow.
Which meant that they ended up with, probably over 100 OKRs, because what they were trying to do is bring every single KPI into an OKR somehow, which just doesn't work. It doesn't work. I think a separate podcast has been recorded on OKRs versus KPIs, so I won't go into the details of that. The listeners can find that one if they want to know how OKRs and KPIs should work harmoniously together in a business. But that's a big kind of alarm bell for us if we see them starting with KPIs rather than starting with priorities. A second one is when we start to see words like maintain in key results. OKRs should be used to drive growth, change, or innovation, which means doing something new, doing something differently, or delivering a significant improvement over previous results. The word maintain is definitely not doing something new, because you can't maintain something that's new. It's not going to be doing something differently, because again, you can't maintain something that's different. And it's definitely not delivering a significant improvement over previous results. It's trying to maintain results. So if we see a key result that's maintain NPS of 8, that's a big alarm bell. If you've got a nice healthy NPS of 8, take it out of your OKRs. That is just trying to put a KPI in where it's not needed. As soon as we start to see that a business or a team in a business has more than 3 or 4 objectives and more than 3 or 4 key results per objective, there's probably something going on where they're just trying to floodlight everything that's going on in their area of the business, rather than using the spotlights to really pick out what the most impactful things are. And I just want to dig deeper actually at that point into another reason we use this spotlight analogy. If you think about a spotlight shining on a stage, it's maybe lighting up 10-15% of the stage at any one time. That's being generous, which means that there's 85-90% of work that's going on outside of that spotlight. Okay, so if we've got 4 spotlights, let's say we've got 60% of the stage lit up, 40%. So 40% of work is going on outside of those spotlights. And that's okay. It's still vital to the production. Everybody working in the background, everybody that isn't on stage in that spotlight at that time is vital to the production that's going on. And it's just the same in a business. There might be 40% of teams that are not involved in a spotlight. They're not involved in an OKR at that time in the OKR cycle. And that's okay. We don't have to fit every single team into an OKR all times. If it's not obvious how they align into the strategic priorities that are being aligned down to them, and we'll talk about cascading OKRs in the next podcast that we're going to record. So tune into that one as well. Then that's okay. Don't panic. It doesn't mean that they're not important. It just means that their work doesn't quite align in right now. But spotlights shift. Spotlights can move along a stage. They can move and light up different parts of the stage. So just because there's a team that isn't in OKRs for this quarter, that does not mean at all that they won't be in OKRs for the next quarter, or they won't be involved in the OKRs next year, for example. The spotlights shift to different parts of the stage, different parts of the business, where the focus is necessary to have a strategical impact. We don't need every team all the time, especially highly operational teams, your finance teams, your legal teams, your HR teams that are doing very operational, transactional activity on a day-to-day basis. It's very unlikely that they're going to be doing something that's driving growth, change, or innovation all the time. And therefore, they probably don't need to use OKRs all the time. And that's all right, because they're in the background of the spotlights rather than in the floodlight.
Koan is a purpose-built solution for managing your OKRs, helping your teams achieve their objectives, getting them aligned, and absolutely helping them stay engaged. Sharing spreadsheets simply doesn't scale when you're trying to grow a business. With Koan, you can scale OKRs across your entire company whilst keeping the teams motivated and moving in the right direction. Now, Lawrence, there's lots of things we love about Koan, but tell me one of yours.
So I've got to say, one of my favourite things is that Koan just allows you to have a bit of fun with the OKR process.
Yeah.
In series 2, I think it was episode 3 of this podcast, we actually spent about half an hour, 40 minutes talking about the importance of making OKRs fun for your team.
Yeah.
And Koan allows you to do that perfectly.
Yeah.
Even just things like adding a GIF to your reflections adds some real personality. And I think I probably waste far too much time each week looking for the perfect GIF, to be honest. But it allows that fun throughout the organisation, and that's something that's really important if you're going to keep people engaged.
You are known for having the best GIFs.
Thank you very much.
In the team, definitely. So if you would like to find out more about how to make OKRs fun whilst using a great system, then pop along to Koan, that's koan.co/giants, where you'll find also a great paper that we co-wrote with them on how to build accountability and collaboration using OKRs.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice example, and kind of allows people to visualize more what we mean by spotlight and floodlight with that kind of stage analogy. Just touching back on you mentioned in another episode in the Toolbox series about KPIs and OKRs. For our listeners that want to find that episode, it's episode 2 of the Toolbox. So that's a good one to listen to as well. So going back to this, so what techniques can a company use to help them prioritize them, to help them get that spotlight approach?
So let me talk you through how we would do an objective setting session, okay? And I specifically use objective setting here, not OKR setting. So at a very top level, I suppose there's a few stages to it. We're going to brainstorm ideas. We're going to remove duplicate ideas. Mm-hmm. We're going to group together themes. And then once we've got those themes, we're basically going to decide, okay, which of these are going to have the highest strategical impact on what we're aligning into. So that might be that we're aligning into some key results at a layer of OKRs above us. So which of these initiatives that we've brainstormed and grouped here are going to have the highest impact on moving the needle in those key results? It might be that we're at the very top level of the business and we're working towards our 3 to 5 year goals. Mm-hmm. And it's okay, well, which of these 12-month initiatives are going to, take us furthest towards those goals? And then we turn those initiatives, those prioritized groupings, into objective statements. And there's a couple of ways we can do it. So one of the things that we do is we do something called a weighting exercise, where, say, we end up with 7 or 8 ideas out of that grouped brainstorming. We would apply a percentage weighting to each of those. And then we would take the top 3 or 4 percentages. We would have the discussion about which of these are the highest priority, and we'd give them the highest percentage. They've got 100 percentage points to play with. And anything, let's say, that's below 15%, we get rid of, or we take the top 3 or 4. And it's not that they're not going to be worked on. It's just that they're not going to be in the spotlight of OKRs, because we can't focus on too many things. People only have a certain capacity for prioritized focus. Another technique is to use what we call stack ranking. So once you've got those, let's say 8 or 9 initiatives that you might want to move forward with, the task is to put them in a single column, and you can't have any side by side. You put those tasks basically in a single list, with the top one being the highest priority or the most impactful initiative, and the bottom one being the least impactful. And again, anything that comes out of the top 3 or 4, you just take out of the OKRs. So there's a couple of techniques there that people can use, because often without those sort of facilitation techniques, workshop techniques, people will end up with 8 or 9 and think, well, that's what we've come up with, so we'll create 8 or 9 OKRs. And the problem is, if you have 8 or 9 OKRs at the top level, and you're going to align OKRs into those, and you're going to have maybe 2 or 3 aligned into each of those 8 or 9, you're already at 16 to 18 OKRs at level 2. Do the same again. You're at hundreds of OKRs before you've even really started to have any impact yet from using them. And you've ended up with a bit of a behemoth that's harder to manage than it is beneficial for the business. So it's really important that this spotlight analogy is kept in mind at all times.
I think, like you say, I think it could be easy to spiral kind of out of control. So it's really important that people keep that front and center, like you say. Yeah,
absolutely.
Great, really interesting. I think that gives our listeners a real insight into kind of the way to do things with OKRs around the spotlight focus. I suppose, any final thoughts before we kind of sign off onto our next episode?
No, it's just be ruthless with yourselves. I can promise you that if you are setting 6, 7, 8 OKRs and you're using them properly, so you're setting stretch targets within them, then they're not all going to get done. If they are all getting done, then they're not stretching enough, and you're probably just putting your business as usual activity in there, which again is kind of cheating the system, but is not the theme of this episode of the podcast. So be really ruthless. These need to be high impact initiatives that we're going to stretch the teams to achieve.
Great. Thanks for chatting through that with us, Lawrence.
No worries.
Yeah, so Lawrence mentioned next time that we'll be talking about cascading, but specifically networking and not hierarchy when it comes to OKRs. So join us next time for episode 9 of our Toolbox series. As always, if you've got any comments about the podcast, feel free to reach out to us on your dedicated podcast platform or via our social channels, or even drop us an email to growth@therebegiants.com. And myself and Lawrence will see you next time for another episode of Giant Talk.